Welcome to the Alphagenix Podcast, where every week we talk to incredible guests from around the world of biohacking, well-being, men's health, and more. Here's your host, co-founder of Alphagenix, Ross Tompkins.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Max. I'm the lead doctor at Alphagenix. Obviously, not Ross Tompkins hosting today. And today I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Thomas Molyneux, who is an addiction and recovery coach. So welcome, Thomas. Thanks for coming along.
Yeah, cheers for having me. I'm glad to be here.
No, it's great to have you. We were just speaking off air just briefly beforehand about how you got into this space. But if you don't mind just telling the listeners and viewers what it is you do and maybe the backstory as to how you kind of got here.
Yeah, sure. So I basically help men quit pornography. People who have been struggling maybe for a long time. I would say most people we help have probably been struggling for at least like 5 or 10 years, trying to quit porn, not really having much success. So I help them quit using something called the Beyond Compulsion method. I got into all of this just through struggling with porn addiction myself. I was about 15, 16, pretty normal kid at school, really, play a lot of football, just kind of just a normal guy. And I ended up sort of having a thing with this girl. And I was really, really nervous the first time we were going to have sex. So I couldn't get erect. Essentially, it started off with erectile dysfunction, 15 or 16 years old. So she goes home and I'm like, geez, like what has happened here? Just completely unexpected, because I'd say overall, very, very confident kid at school. And this is just a total contrast. And I've just felt so low in confidence. I felt like a failure, felt frustrated, anxious, just like what has happened? So go online, discover something called NoFap and porn-induced erectile dysfunction. And I was like, right, that probably makes sense, because up until that moment with that girl, I'd probably watched porn pretty much every day, I would say, for about 3 years since the age of, around 12. So I've been watching porn every day. First time, go to have sex with a woman in real life, and of course, get erectile dysfunction. So from there, around 15, 16, just go on a mission. I'm just like, right, how do we quit porn? And I never ever gave up. I was always trying to figure out, how do you quit? But what would happen is I'd consume all these videos on YouTube, usually NoFap or porn addiction recovery people, and they'd give all this advice, and I'd try it all. And I got really into self-development, read a ton of books, really got into something called internal family systems, really got into meditation, doing like an hour each day, got into fitness and various other things, started to get really, really busy, building a business, had all this stuff going on. However, none of that actually really helped me quit porn. And what would happen is I'd go on these things that I'd call a streak. So a NoFap streak, where you go a few weeks or a few months without porn, you gain a load of confidence, you start to feel a little bit better again. And then inevitably I would go and look at porn once again, have a relapse and feel absolutely terrible, just drained, ashamed, lacking in energy. And also the stuff I started to look at sort of got progressively novel. And it'd usually be on social media, but it just got into stuff where I was like, I'd be on like Instagram or Twitter, and you're just looking at kind of weird stuff. So I felt really like just disgusting as well. So yeah, that was essentially the journey of struggling with porn, and then eventually managed to overcome that problem. And now I partner with a woman who is awesome, called Mary, and we try and help other people quit porn as well.
Yeah. So it was a journey of trying to fix yourself that ended up becoming almost like a self-educated expert especially when you teamed up with Mary, and she so was it Mary who really ended up sort of getting you sort of not fixed, the right word, but sorted. Was that the sort of road to full recovery as such?
I would say so. Yeah, it's been a weird one, because I sort of thought that I already had this fixed, and that's kind of part of addiction, which we may get into. But essentially, because I'd got to a position where I was doing the streaks and they'd go on for like 4 or 5 months, and then the usage would maybe drop down to, let's say, an average of once a month throughout a year, most people would probably see that as well, he's not got a problem with addiction anymore. He's not addicted to porn. However, what I now understand is it's not really about the length of time you go without the thing. It's about actually, are you truly, truly free from this? Like, do you have conditions in your life that are set up so that you don't look at porn, or are you actually mentally free where you feel like totally in control of yourself? Like, you can do literally anything, and that's not going to result in you looking at porn. Because the way in which I managed to maintain and control the addiction was through removing triggers and staying busy, staying active, and doing all the things that everyone else on the internet will tell people to do for addiction. But I wasn't truly free because I didn't actually have the ability to deal with urges. When the urges came up, I was just avoiding the possibility of feeling the urges. So what Mary taught me is basically a method where you read through a script and you can actually like think through the choice in that moment. Like, what do I want to do right now? And so those urges can still come up, but you get to a position where you just know with absolute certainty, all right, if I want to look at porn, which you probably will, then I know how to deal with that. Whereas where I think a lot of people go wrong is they're trying to avoid the wanting, but that doesn't make sense when you're in an addiction, because the neural pathways have changed and you are going to have the wanting, because that's just how the brain has changed over time due to the addiction.
Yeah. So would that transcend across addictions then? Does that sort of, you talk about the common addictions, and I was quite surprised when I looked online beforehand. I was trying to sort of see, how common is porn addiction? Obviously, porn usage is hugely common. I was quite shocked to see that some of the statistics put men's pornography use at over 80 odd percent, or adult males. But I suppose what I'm getting at is, does those techniques that you're referring to in terms of knowing, you almost like describing rewiring your brain thought patterns, or chemistry almost, does that apply to all addictions in terms of drugs, alcohol, all of that sort of sector, let's say?
Yeah, absolutely. So the method itself is called the Beyond Compulsion method, and I don't know if Mary had actually worked with many people struggling with porn prior to me. So Mary got in touch with me to come on my podcast because she wanted to basically get her message out there to more people. She's like, I don't know how old she is. I've never asked her. I guess she's in like her late 50s, maybe her 60s. But she's been working in this like a long time. And to be honest with you, to say it straight, and I've said this to her so she knows, but her like skills in terms of maybe like technology, sales, marketing, kind of getting her message out there, not the best,
Yeah.
So I was like, right, I'm sure I can help her get her message out there. But yeah, her method basically was set up for just addiction in general. So she's worked with people addicted to drugs. She's worked with nicotine, was like her main one, and also food addiction. Obviously, that's massive in the States where she's based, and it's massive here, I guess, in the UK as well now. But yeah, it was basically all addiction. What I find particularly interesting doing this work and working with guys is that what we find is a lot of them are actually addicted to many things. It's not just porn. So porn's like the big one, which they're probably focused on quitting. But then when we really get into it, it's like the easy alternative to porn is you replace that with just going on social media and scrolling. You replace it with gaming. You replace it with food. You replace it with a relationship and starting to have sex all the time. It's like, that's kind of what I did. That's how I ended up going on a lot of those streaks again. It's like, you remove all those triggers to porn and you stay really busy and active. But a lot of the time you're still in that compulsion, because then I'm just going and maybe becoming like a workaholic or having sex all the time with like my girlfriends in the past and things like that. But it's like, that's not actually going beyond compulsion, because you're still in that compulsive state. It's just you're replacing it with something maybe less extreme or different. The other one for me was back in 2020, I got really into gambling, and I ended up building this like portfolio, like gambling sort of portfolio on this platform worth around 50K. I was only about 20, 21 at the time, and that was all due to addiction. I ended up losing a ton of money there. So I think it definitely applies to everything. I think with the porn, the reason I want to focus on that one is because I think it's so prevalent nowadays, and it's definitely the one that's impacting my mental health the most out of everything by a long way. But I think if I look back, I was probably addicted to loads of things as well, and I just wasn't really aware of it.
That's interesting, isn't it? How when you say it's quite prevalent, and you don't really see it talked about too much, do you? Obviously, people, the whole smoking thing was big, and that was really hit hard over the last few decades, and And then maybe, there's always been the undercurrent of alcohol, alcohol abuse, alcoholism. There's always been, AA and all of those things. But how common do you think that the porn addiction is? How do you have any ideas of numbers really as such?
Yeah,
They're all estimates. The problem is they're all estimates, aren't they? And how do you actually work out how common it is? Because you can't go up to someone in the street and say, "Are you addicted to pornography?" It's not an obvious question to ask someone in the street as such. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's so difficult to know. I was actually reading a study not too long ago, though. That was based off maybe around 2,000 people in the States. It was a totally mixed sample size, all kinds of ages, different genders. And gender is a big one because there's way more men who are addicted than women. So if this study was just on men, the figures would have been way higher. But it was looking at around, I think it was between like 7 and 9%, depending on the questions. But that was based on who feels like they're addicted to porn was definitely one of the questions. That'd probably be my guess. But then when you actually take that bit of data and it's let's say it's 7% or so, and then you work out how many people is that out of a population of 300 plus million in the States, still looking at I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's at least 20 million.
Yeah. I was going to say that. I was just going to try to do the maths in my head to think how many people is that then? But it's millions, basically, isn't it? And if you extrapolate that over to Europe, because, usually our behaviors, maybe some of our behaviors are a little bit, behind the USA. It's like you were talking about food addiction. We tend to follow a little bit later in terms of some of our trends. But yeah, you could probably extrapolate that to Europe and say, yeah, it's millions of men. Is there, I suppose, a good question for people listening or watching would be, is there a way where you can work out if it's an addiction or if it's something that you're just watch the occasional porn? Is there a line that people can check, for themselves now watching, thinking, oh, is this a problem? Is there an easy way to do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one way, I'll give two ways, but the first way I would say is, try and stop and see what happens. If you can't stop, then maybe you have a bit of an issue here. The other thing is there's this big difference between spontaneous desire and compulsive desire. So spontaneous desire is, let's say you're walking down the street and you see, or maybe you smell some really, really good food. And you have a look in the shop window. Oh, okay, there's a burger there. I really fancy a burger now. So you go in, you grab a burger because maybe you're a bit hungry and it just looks like a really good burger. That would be spontaneous desire. Compulsive desire would be, you're thinking in your head, all right, I really, really want a burger right now. And often it's going to be because you want to get out of some kind of discomfort and you just have this craving, and then you're just thinking about it all the time. So then you go and you maybe go on a walk and you're trying to find a burger. You go past a few places. You're like, I don't know if I want that one or not. You keep on going, and then eventually try to get the best burger possible. Just I some local takeaway or whatever, right? That would probably be more compulsive desire. So the person with the spontaneous desire, let's say they walk down the street the next day, they go past the same burger place. They've had the smell, they've had the taste the day before, and they go, you know what? Don't really fancy a burger today. And they just carry on walking. They don't think about it at all. Whereas the person who's got this compulsion, they're overthinking it and they're kind of fixating on getting something in the future. That's what their mind's occupied by. Or maybe the alternative is they're trying not to think about the burger. They're going to themselves I really don't eat that burger. And they're just thinking through it loads and loads and loads. And it's a similar concept with porn. So someone who's in a porn addiction, they're probably thinking about the porn, whether it's I don't want to look at porn or I do want to look at porn. They're kind of in this internal battle going from one state to another in their head. That's where I was living. And, as I say, I got quite good at the not sort of actually engaging in the porn, but I was still thinking about the porn so often, thinking about I'm not going to look at porn. I'm not going to look at porn. I'm not going to look at porn. And, watching the NoFap videos and stuff like that. It's someone who's not addicted to porn wouldn't be going online watching videos on how to not look at porn. That's very compulsive. So I think that's probably a good sort of way of measuring to yourself whether you're addicted to porn or not. It's just how much are you thinking about this, really?
Yeah. And you mentioned there as well about the how much are you thinking about it? How much is it almost does it have to interfere with what you do day to day, or is it more of a step of interfering in here rather than perhaps externally? Like you said, when you kind of were going long periods without, but it was still up here. So it was almost like, I presume you were kind of living a sort of normal existence, day to day, but it was still kind of going round in here on repeats, and that's maybe where the sort of addictive or pathological element to it is.
Yeah, big time. And I think that's the biggest problem with like porn as opposed to some other addictions, is like it is so hidden. So if you had a look at someone who's maybe got a food addiction or a drug addiction, you can probably see that, like, they're going to be overweight, or maybe you can tell that they've got a drug addiction. You can literally like see that. Whereas with a porn addiction, I think it's like so easy to hide. Like no one ever knew or suspected I had a porn addiction. I'd have girlfriends, they wouldn't know I had a porn addiction. Family, they wouldn't know. Friends, they wouldn't know. And I was just like outwardly seeming like this totally normal guy, which I was, because having addicted neural pathways doesn't make you like this porn addict. I don't really like it when people try and attach like such a strong label to someone. It's like not this encompassing whole identity that you need to have. It's just you have addicted neural pathways, and that is a problem, and it can be changed due to neuroplasticity. But yeah, essentially I think it can be really, really easy to hide it. And I would definitely say that if you're thinking about it very often and still living like a very effective, productive life where you are doing, great things, maybe you're working hard and you've got a functional family and relationships and whatnot, it's like, okay, well, all of that stuff's great, but it doesn't take away the fact that you're still kind of living in a bit of a porn hell in your own mind, and no one necessarily has to know about that.
Yeah. I suppose that is part of the issue as well, is like you said, it's easily hidden, but it doesn't mean the person is not suffering inside. And like you said, because maybe there is that shame attached to it, it's almost maybe harder to talk about. I suppose as well, like we were saying before, it's not so out there as you don't see it in papers like maybe drug, like they talk about in America, the issues around fentanyl and things like that. No one's really saying, do you know what? A lot of people might have a porn problem here, and maybe we should talk about it. So I suppose that's where your work comes in, which is actually trying to help people who perhaps, wouldn't normally seek out help because they're too almost like ashamed of it, I guess. I suppose it's, you could say it's a little bit like men with low or men with erectile dysfunction. I think we're starting to talk about that sort of thing more. And obviously in my world of low testosterone work, we try and encourage people to actually say, how are things down there? But I suppose it's similar in your area where you're actually trying to encourage men to actually look, well, obviously maybe it's less affects women, but actually talk about it, because it's, it is a genuine issue, and we can help to get you through it, really. Yeah,
definitely. And it is, I guess it's becoming maybe a little bit more common to talk about these things, but there's no doubt it is really difficult. And you're right, shame's a big word in there. A lot of people who go and try and get like the people who go and like sign up to the free training, like on my website, so many of them won't put in their first or last name, but they'll put in their email. So I've had people put in like, there was one guy who put in like R9, like, or just like footballers' names and stuff like that. And it's like, they're so scared of anyone ever finding out that they've got this problem. And we've got clients at the moment as well who have wives, and they have no idea at all that they're doing the program or that they're addicted to porn. So there is definitely a lot of shame around it. And yeah, a lot of our clients have had erectile dysfunction, and as I say, I did in the past as well. So I don't know, do you find people come to you ever who, they have some shame and they don't really want to talk about it as well then?
I think by the time they've reached out to us at the clinic and had their blood work done and things like that, they tend to be quite forthcoming about the erection side of it by that point. But often when you speak to them, it's been going on a good while, and I think it almost reaches that point where it's like, right, this is I've got to do something about it by this point. And I suppose, so in that sense, I don't know how long it's been going on often before they approach treatment. I suppose, is that the case for your guys as well, actually getting to the point of where it's actually like, right, I've got to get some help for this? Is that something that you see it's been going on for years by the time they approach you, or is it a bit variable? Or
yeah, it's a good question. I think actually that is how it's sort of been so far. And I don't know whether that's like a bit of a mix of kind of our messages kind of targeting in particular people who have been struggling with this for a while. But yeah, the people we're working with at the moment, most of them, I would say, yeah, at least 5 years, most of them 10, some of them 30 years struggling with this. And you know, like for me, myself as well, it kind of does take up a lot of, like, it takes time basically to get to a position where you're comfortable talking about it. Like it's a very iterative process. You know, I reckon if I had have thought about going on a podcast to talk about this maybe like 3 years ago, I would have been like, absolutely no way. And then I just kind of slowly built up the confidence to talk about it over time. I guess as my use of porn has reduced and I've overcome it, it's got a lot easier as well, obviously. But yeah, I think for a lot of people to get to that position where you actually feel like, yeah, I really do need to get help with this. You need to get to a position where the addicted part of the mind isn't minimizing it as well. That's another thing that I just see so frequently on like social media and YouTube, and just prevalent throughout the whole of society really, is people actually thinking that they're fine, thinking that they're not addicted to porn. And I don't want to create any sort of more problems around this. As I say, you know, I don't necessarily think that if you're looking at porn, you're addicted. A lot of people can look at porn and it's not a problem for them. But I think there is a lot of guys out there who, because they are addicted, the addicted part of the mind is saying to themselves, this isn't a big deal. You know, this isn't a problem. I can continue. The consequences aren't that bad, because that is a very common thing for the addicted part of the mind to do with our clients. Like that's what we see, is basically it tries to minimize it, because if it can minimize it, then they can continue to get their fix essentially. So I think there's a lot of people who are probably struggling with this, and they're maybe not aware that they are struggling with it. But the great news is you obviously can overcome it. And I just feel like that peace of mind on the other side is just so worth it. And a lot of people may never have experienced that, because they've been hooked since they were like so young. Like, you know, I got into porn when I was like 12, got into watching it when I was 12. And that's like pretty normal age really to get into watching porn. And a lot of guys even younger as well.
Yeah. So it's almost like you part of that addictive part of your brain is justifying it, minimizing it. So at the end of the day, there might be a problem there, but some of your thoughts will be telling you, no, it's no big deal, man. Just don't worry about it. And that can go on for years before you actually realize, you know, before you actually have to overcome that aspect of it. Yeah,
that's exactly it. So we have this concept called junky thinking, and I really recommend if anyone's watching or listening to this and they are addicted to porn, to start documenting and like writing down your own junky thinking. You know, I've had so much of it, and we just see so much of it from our clients. Basically, it is that it's any excuse, rationalization, justification to continue engaging in a compulsive behavior which is causing you so much harm. And yeah, a very common one is going to be like, this isn't too bad, this isn't a big deal. And I had one this week from just a guy on YouTube who was commenting on one of my videos, and he was, you know, he's not a client or anything, but his junky thinking was basically like, I am addicted to porn. This is who I am. Nothing can change. You know, once the addicted part of my mind's in control, then I have no power over that. So all I can really do is distract myself. What I'm trying to get out there to the world is that's not true. That is junky thinking in itself, because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you think that in those moments that you have an urge or a craving, you can't handle it, then you aren't going to be able to handle it. You're going to go and look at porn. And the rest of the world, in my opinion, is kind of not on purpose. You know, everyone's meaning really well, but I really do believe there's so many messages that are actually creating more helplessness for people struggling with porn, because all of this stuff around, you know, removing the triggers, staying busy, all the stuff I tried for like 9 years, it's all based on this false idea that people can't handle their urges, they can't handle their cravings, because none of those suggestions for how to deal with an addiction would exist if people realize that actually you always have that choice in that moment to go, okay, I either do this or I don't do this. And when people can realize that they have that choice, they do become incredibly free, and they will gain so much peace of mind. And it's just so empowering as well to know that this always is your choice. You don't have to go and look at porn. No matter what, you are in control of yourself.
So is bravery the right word, or is it about, you know, it's almost like stop, you know, distracting yourself, all of these things, keeping busy, picking up hobbies, that sort of thing, is that running away from something which you maybe need to turn around and face? Is that too simplistic a way of thinking about it? But is that kind of the idea? It's facing it rather than just almost not ignoring it, but running around so you don't have to face it.
Yeah. So we have like a bit of a phrase which is willingly accepting the temporary discomfort of withdrawal, because what we say is that people aren't actually getting anything out of porn. Like, there's no actual benefit to watching porn. I mean, if you think about it from just like the most simple, basic evolutionary standpoint, it's like looking at porn isn't actually helping you in any way at all. So you're not actually getting anything, but what you are doing is you're getting out of some kind of discomfort, and that discomfort has been created because your mind has become involved in a psychological, emotional dependency on a mind's mood, or an experience. So porn is a super stimulus. In my opinion, it really, really should not be freely available. It should not be totally accessible, and it should definitely not be normalized to be used. You know, I mean, I've had guys talk to me and say that the impact on their brain from porn has been very similar to the impact from drugs like heroin. You know, I've had a guy who was addicted to heroin literally say that to me. So, you know, it's a real problem. But yeah, back to the point, I think people don't want to face that temporary discomfort. They don't want to feel it because it does feel uncomfortable. You know, I don't think quitting porn is easy. I think it is challenging, and you do have to feel some discomfort of that craving. But if you go through that discomfort and you actually think it through, and you go, okay, well, these are the options. If I engage in porn, I'm going to be stuck in this addiction. If I choose not to engage in porn, I'm going to rewire the addictive neural pathways. And you think through, well, option A is, you know, feeling drained, feeling weak, probably erectile dysfunction for a lot of people, feeling tired, exhausted, lack of confidence, all of those things. Or option B, it's like, well, what am I going to gain? It's like, you're going to feel confident, alive, energetic, productive, more connection, probably more compassion for others, more energy and time to actually help other people in the world, or whatever it is for you. It's like, they're your two options in that moment that you have the craving. You think through that enough times, what's going to happen is you're going to change your brain, and you are going to rewire the addictive neural pathways. But yeah, it does definitely take a little bit of discomfort. And I think a lot of people don't want to feel that discomfort. And it is easier. It's easier to just go escape it and, you know, maybe substitute out for something else. That's definitely an easier route to take.
You can certainly see how that like you're talking about, like we mentioned before, about how it links to other addictions as well, because that temporary discomfort, it's almost like you're doing something to soothe that, you know, food, nicotine, alcohol, it's that discomfort soothing. I've heard people talk about that before with addiction. It's soothing some form of discomfort rather than wanting to feel it and face it, I guess. It's almost like not really escape mechanism as such, but it's a soother. Why don't you touch upon the you mentioned about the beyond compulsion, and I was looking on the website, there sort of seem to be 3 phases, is that right? Maybe if you don't mind touching upon those a little bit for the audience, just to get an idea about how it works.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, the beyond compulsion method was created by Mary Paulus, who's worked on this since 1990. It was the only method really to work for me. So start off with phase 1, which is going beyond deprivation. And this is just like such a crazy concept to me, because, you know, it's something that I had no idea of before Mary taught it to me last year. So essentially deprivation, it's these sort of feelings like, you know, you're irritated, you're feeling frustrated. It's like, essentially there's something there, like pornography is there, it's accessible, you know, you can get it within 20 seconds. So you've got something there, and in your mind you're saying, I can't have it, I can't look at porn, you know, no fap. It's literally no fap, you know, I can't look at porn, nope, I'm not going to do that. All right, so you say to yourself in addiction, like over and over and over, can't look at porn, can't look at porn, can't look at porn. What that does over time is it creates these feelings of deprivation, because the thing you want is being withheld from you. And the problem with this is that you end up feeling really frustrated and irritated, and it's like this disgusting feeling that you really want this thing. Imagine you're like 5 years old and you've got a sibling maybe playing with a toy, and for whatever reason they're like, look, you can't play with this, it's mine, but it's like right in front of you. So they're the feelings of deprivation. What people do is they go, right, I've had enough of this eventually, and they get out of the feelings of deprivation by eventually going and looking at porn. But how Mary taught me this is right, you're not actually deprived. If you were actually deprived of pornography, then why would you be looking at porn? It's like, Tom, you looked at porn like 3 weeks ago. Like, you're clearly not deprived if you're addicted to porn. Like, you are actually looking at porn. So you're definitely not deprived. And the only way we could ever deprive anyone of porn is like literally putting them like on a raft in the middle of the ocean, sending them up to space, putting them in a cave. You know, they're never going to be deprived of porn. Porn's always there. It's always an option for you to look at. So that's the first phase, is going beyond these feelings of deprivation. And we have like a script where you'll basically say fact 1 and fact 2, which is about, I'm wanting to engage and I can engage. And that will help you really reinforce this idea in your mind. And then we get on to phase 2, which is going beyond indecision. And essentially what we have is the junky thoughts, which I've sort of talked about a little bit already. And it's kind of seeing there's this like man behind the curtain, as we use the Wizard of Oz analogy. It's like they seem all powerful and like really significant and scary and like, these junky thoughts. But the reality of junky thoughts is it's just the addictive part of the mind. It's just coming up with some excuse, some rationalization, some justification to try and get you to engage. And they're not actually all that powerful. It's just a part of your brain. And that's okay. They're natural and they're going to persist and they're going to be a bit annoying. But once you can see them for what they are, just junky thoughts, and, start to write them down regularly, then that will really help you. So hopefully that can help people if anyone is listening to this struggling. So the junky thoughts, and you just kind of go beyond that sort of like that the lies, really. It's just all these lies that they're not real. Okay, and then phase 3, we have like beyond indecision. Essentially get into a position where you're like in this stance of like, look, I'm the one in control here. I know exactly what I'm going to do if I have an urge. And we talk about these unanswerable questions, which are really interesting again, that I had never really come across. But it's basically all these questions that the addictive part of the mind will come up with, which try and get people to engage. Because there'll be questions like, have I already relapsed? Or it'll be things like, is this porn? And you see these questions on the internet all the time. So different questions around, does this count as porn? Does it not count as porn? Have I already relapsed? And just things like that. And it's like, okay, well, these questions, often they can't be answered. They're totally subjective. You can have 1,000 different answers on the internet, and you will find 1,000 different answers. And what you need to do is get to a position where you just go like, okay, I know. Not knowing the answer to this unanswerable question is not the problem right now. The real problem right now is that I'm actually wanting to engage my compulsive behavior, and I have option A or option B. I need to make a choice right now as to how I move forward and willingly accept the temporary discomfort. Phase 3 is really about going beyond that indecision of like not knowing and actually getting into a more proactive mindset of sort of attacking and changing these addictive neural pathways rather than being defensive and maybe like escaping and substituting and going around in circles trying to answer questions that can't be answered. That's kind of like the basics of the beyond compulsion method. But I feel like there's quite a lot more, so I've probably not done the best job of explaining it.
Well, I bet no. I mean, fair enough. I mean, it's probably impossible to explain it on a podcast unless you had a one-on-one person who you're actually treating as such. Because it reminds me a little bit about when you talk about the junky thoughts and things like that. It's when I had low testosterone. I've talked about having quite a lot of anxiety and a very busy mind, and it almost like I couldn't make sense of my thoughts. And part of that process at the time, I remember obviously meditating and writing down thoughts. And is it in a similar sense that you're bringing those, you're referring to them like addicted part of the brain, those thoughts coming, the junky thoughts, you're bringing them more to the logical part of the brain, where if you write them down, you're actually able to look at it and go, actually, yeah, that's actually not what I want to do, or that's not actually the right thought to maybe listen to. Is it kind of a similar concept?
Yeah, it's exactly that. So phase 2, I can't remember if when I was just talking a minute ago, I called it beyond indecision or not, but phase 2 is actually called beyond deception. I might have got the name wrong just now, but it's going beyond deception. So they're going to come up with these sort of lies and justifications. And from like a neuroscientific perspective, it is really just about turning on that prefrontal cortex, like the rational part of your brain again, because you have the mesolimbic pathway, which is like the really primitive part of the brain. And then you have like the mesocortical pathway. And the mesocortical pathway is kind of where you're getting the dopamine into the prefrontal cortex. So it's like by identifying those junky thoughts and talking back to them, it's essentially like you're taking that dopamine down a different route. Because it can either go, dopamine's all about the future, and the future can either be full of these like primitive desires and trying to get things just without actually thinking about the consequences at all, or you can think about the future from a perspective of, okay, what consequences do I want in the future? And so if you can identify those junky thoughts and really think through those and go, yeah, that is irrational, that is the addictive part of my mind, and that isn't true, then it's like you're almost shifting that dopamine from this like primitive part of the brain, the mesolimbic pathway, into the mesocortical pathway, where you're actually thinking it through using the prefrontal cortex. And then in those moments that you actually have the urge, that's where I feel like the real rewiring is taking place, because that's when you're actually fundamentally changing how you think. So you change how you feel, and therefore you change how you act. So it's called rational emotive therapy, which is being used. But yeah, that's it. Exactly what you said, about like kind of, you meditate and you start to write down the notes, a bit like CBT as well. And it can all be really, really, really useful for sure.
Is it like the I was just reading a book called the Chimp Paradox, where they talk about the human brain and then the almost like the animal, the chimp brain, and how the chimp brain is not always that helpful. I mean, it can be in rare occasions, but usually it's fairly impulsive and not, like said, looking towards the future, and talking about how, like exactly like you said, about how to almost rewire the brain, but almost send blood to the right part of the brain during the situation. It's all about, maybe not running away with the illogical thoughts. And I think that's quite a eye-opening thing for people to see sometimes, is the fact that a lot of our thoughts are not necessarily the logical part of our brain trying to sort of help us. And sometimes it can be pretty hindering. I think that was quite, I remember finding that out when I was in my 20s. I was like, hold on a minute. A lot of a lot of this internal narrative is actually nonsense. And I suppose it's a similar aspect here. It's that you were talking about the addictive part of the brain. It's a short-termist, can be fairly destructive and not always helpful for the long term. Yeah,
big time. Yeah, it is similar to that. Yeah, I can't remember the Chimp Paradox too well. I think that was like the first book I ever read in like the self-development world. But yeah, it is that really. It's like you do have this like indefinite sort of, not battle, but this thing going on in your mind where it's like you do have these different parts that are saying different things, and one part is quite useful and productive, and the other part is really the opposite. So I think you do want to just kind of keep on trying to be proactive in creating strategies so that when the chimp is in control, or the addictive part of the mind, which is probably the sort of same part of the brain, when that's in control, you can actually deal with that. That would be probably my biggest advice to anyone, is be proactive in like strategically managing that rather than trying to use willpower. I think in the Chimp Paradox, they do talk about, it's like, let's say you go into a cage with like a gorilla or something. It's like, you're not going to win that fight, you're going to lose. So what you want to do is be strategic in making sure you don't end up in a cage with a gorilla. And if you do that, you know how to get out of it. And that's all pre-planned already.
How long would you say, might be interesting for people or useful, how long would you say that treatment process in the program, I mean, maybe it's impossible to know, but how long does it tend to last for someone to maybe go from, approaching yourselves and then maybe getting to a point where they're recovered, or whatever the sort of end point would be, perhaps? Is it months, weeks? What sort of ballpark?
Yeah, so at the moment we're running it as a 12-week program, but we're quite new to it all, to be honest. So, we've only had about 15 clients since we started at the start of this year. So I think it's going to be a bit of an iterative process for us at this point. 12 weeks seems like a good number for now, but maybe that will change in the future. But what I have found really, really interesting to learn from Mary again this year, and, as I say, Mary is kind of the real expert on all of this stuff. I just kind of listen to her because it's been the best method for me. But she says, it's not really about how many days you go without porn. It's more about how much can you like change those thought patterns and use your scripts. Because what we do is we provide people with a script to deal with the urges, and you could read that script 100 times a day and go beyond compulsion quite quickly, I'd imagine. Maybe it's a couple of weeks or maybe a couple of months. It's not too long a period of time if you just use that script repeatedly over and over and over and essentially go through those urges by thinking it through effectively. Whereas what you could do is be in an addiction, not really use the script so much, kind of distract yourself and do all the old techniques. And you're probably going to be stuck in this addiction for a really long time, because essentially you really need to change those thought patterns. So it's up to clients in many ways. I mean, we structure it as a 12-week program, but I imagine people could actually go beyond compulsion and get to this like place of feeling really free mentally quite quickly. The only other caveat, I guess, is that there is something called delta phos-B, which is this transcription factor, which basically changes the brain, and it can stay, what I've heard is for around 2 months. It stays in the brain. It basically creates loads more cravings. As I say, you can't actually get rid of cravings because the brain's going to create more cravings in one way or another. And the brain chemistry changes due to something called delta phos-B, which is going to basically make you want porn very, very often. And what I've heard in books like Your Brain on Porn, which is a good book, is that it lasts for around 2 months. Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, so we're not talking years and years, though. It's something that people could really make a huge difference to their life in that's a relatively short period of time, isn't it? In terms of an average lifespan. Yeah, brilliant. So we mentioned about the podcast as well. I think that's a really useful tool for people to maybe to first go to the website and things. But why don't you tell people a little bit about where they can find you, where they can find the podcast on, socials, just so people, if they've watched this and they think, actually, this guy looks like, the right person to help me.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'd say just, if you can, get in touch and we can have a chat, that'd be cool. But yeah, it's www.thomasmolyneux.com is the website. And then I have a podcast called Finally Quit Porn, which I'm sort of co-hosting mostly with Mary. And then we have a few external guests as well from time to time. So yeah, come and say hello, it'd be cool. And even if it's just like, you don't want to join the program or anything like that, but you just kind of want to share your experience, obviously I'll always be there to kind of keep that totally confidential, because I appreciate a lot of people feel a lot of like shame, and it can be really hard to open up about this issue. But I've been talking to guys about this issue now for quite a few years, and I think it can really alleviate that shame to know like there's someone else there who's been through this and they've gone through what you're going through. So it can be quite nice to just sort of share your journey or share your story. So yeah, get in touch and drop us a message if you want to.
Well, that's the beauty of having been through it yourself. It's so helpful for guys to see someone who struggled, because you, like you mentioned, you went through it for a long time, but actually now you're at the completely other end of it, and you're able to help and help other men, lots of men, and spread the word and get the awareness out there, which is just excellent. Yeah. So drop him a line, drop him a message. Thank you very much, Thomas, for coming on. It's been really interesting. And actually, I think it's going to help a lot of guys out there. So follow him to his website after this if you want to drop them a message and get working with the team, or just for any advice and things, and listen to the podcast. Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Honestly, I've really, really enjoyed chatting with you. Brilliant questions, and hopefully this podcast will help one or two people. So yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. I think it's been brilliant. Thanks for coming on.
Nice one. Cheers. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Alphagenix Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss next week's episode. For more resources on Alphagenix and men's health, visit alphagenix.co.uk. Until next time.